Hi, this is Annie Grace, and welcome to this Naked Mind podcast. So today I'm here with Amy, and something cool about Amy, this is super fun. So many people have had amazing stories and then have become certified This Naked Mind coaches, and Amy is one of them. So welcome, Amy. So glad to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Annie. I appreciate that.
That's so awesome. So I can't wait to hear. I obviously know quite a bit about your story, but I want all the details because you have a powerful story, and I can't wait to hear it and share it with our listeners. So where did it all begin for you? Why don't you take us all the way back, sort of to the beginning?
Wow, that's a very loaded question. For me, I think the beginning began when I grew up in the church, and Christianity, my faith, is so important to me and still is important to me. And growing up in the church, there was a lot of things of how I should be, how I should act, and all the shoulds, and in terms of what you should do. And as I grew up in that church, I began to realize I wasn't quite the same as other little girls, that I was friends with. I wasn't quite the same, and I started to look at things in a different way. And that was because my sexuality was different. I started to realize I didn't have crushes on boys. I had crushes on girls, and it's like this isn't right. And that felt very odd. And because of that, I felt like I didn't belong, in the atmosphere that I was growing up. And so I think that's where it began with me, is that you talk about cognitive dissonance in your book, the cognitive dissonance of you want to be faithful to God and do what God wants you to do, but you also want to be faithful to who you are and who, as you feel. And so I had struggled, with that most of my life, and especially, going in the teenage years. And how that worked out was, like, I didn't drink. Like, I didn't start drinking. I mean, I had the occasional wine cooler, with your girlfriend, school girlfriends and all that stuff. But it wasn't something that became something that I started paying attention to until after I turned 21. And so, when I turned 21, I had a boyfriend at the time, and we would go out, and I had this Long Island iced tea. I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing, right? It's like, I feel normal right now. Like, I feel like I belong, and I felt like I belonged to him, and I felt I belonged in the social space that I didn't have before that. So that became a trigger. My unconscious mind became a trigger of, I need alcohol to feel normal. I need alcohol to belong. And so that started my journey of the dependence of alcohol to feel something that was outside of myself, to belong. So, like I said, I didn't start drinking really until after that, in my early 20s. And mostly it was to numb my feelings around the cognitive dissonance between my sexuality and Christianity. Mm-hmm. And to feel that normalcy, with people. I belonged, and I'm an introvert, and going out with people, it was like I needed alcohol to socialize, as well. And so that's when I started noticing that, that dependency of alcohol in my early 20s. And, there, I started drinking more and more, and realized that, I was becoming depressed. And, also just that, because my faith is so strong, is that I knew there was something not right with what I was doing, not right with my sexuality, and not right with drinking, and not right with God. And I became suicidal. And went to therapy, went to AA, and I had a wonderful mentor. She was actually my boss at the time in my early 20s, who took me under her wing, and we would go to AA together. And that was such a wonderful experience because I didn't know anything different. I didn't know how to talk about what I was feeling, what I was going through, and I felt like such an acceptance, with this group. It didn't work for me, obviously. It didn't work because, I went back to drinking, and but for a period of time, I became really involved back in the church and started going into Christian ministry and I was going into school to be a Christian counselor, and I did prison ministry and trying to pray the gay away. So trying to push myself outside of who I really was. And that worked for a couple of years, but it doesn't work long term, right? And so that whole realization of I am losing myself in the process became really strong for me. Like I can't deny, who I am. And the drinking continued, to get worse during that, after that fact, when I realized that I can't pray the gay away and I can't be someone that other people want me to be. And I think that's when it started to really spiral out of control, more so after that period of time of realizing that, that I need to reconcile who I am and figure out who I am first. So that was a very difficult, period for me.
So, and during this time, was there any social, like community, family support, social support? Did you feel really on your own in this?
I did, because I hid the fact that I was gay. From my family and from my friends, and I knew that was tied to my drinking, and so I didn't. The social support that I had was with my mentor, my boss at the time, and going to AA, and that was what I knew. And then, when I talked about my drinking with my family, and they knew when I was a teenager that I struggled with my sexuality, but they thought that I had resolved it. Like it was a phase. And so, when I talked to my mom and my brother and, people that, were really close to me about that, it was, I said, no, I'm good. My faith is really strong. I'm going into ministry. This is what I'm going to do. And so that was the life that I was going to lead. And then it became harder for me because I knew I wasn't living my authentic life of who God made me to be. And that's when it really became hard. I would pray that God just take me away, because I didn't want to disappoint him, and I didn't want to do the things that I was doing and drinking and living this life that I knew wasn't what he wanted me to do. And so it became really hard, and that was a really tough struggle later in my 20s, of when I realized I can't keep pushing aside who I am and not being honest with the people that I love about who I am. And so it was a struggle, all throughout my 30s and early 40s of doing that. And so, I think what really got me spiraling more so out of control was that, in my early 30s, my girlfriend at the time committed suicide.
Mm.
And she had a drinking problem as well. And I had pushed religion on her before that. Like, I would say push religion. That's what people, her friends told me. That's what her family told me. And I felt a lot of guilt around that of, what did I do? How I felt guilt. I felt like I'd done something wrong, and that, I still haven't gotten over it. I mean, it's still a struggle for me of being that close to someone that did something like that, and feeling like you were a part of that. And so after that, I kind of turned away from God and started drinking even more so, because I couldn't get over that guilt and the shame that I felt about all of that. And so that played, I mean, in terms of my story, where did it start for you? I mean, all of those things I think are those connections. So.
And so when she committed suicide, were you able to go to your family for support at that point in time, or because you were
I still
living?
wasn't out. They didn't know she was my girlfriend.
Okay.
Yeah, they knew that she was my friend, but they didn't know that she was my girlfriend. So that was very, very hard.
Yeah, because
To go
it's
through
a
that.
very different relationship, and yeah, wow, that's so. All right, so here you are trying to pick up the pieces, and then also compounded by this feeling of how did I maybe play into this, which, just for the record, I don't think that you do have any blame here, Amy. I feel very much like your desire to express the faith that you have felt true in your heart, and like the love you have is pure and good. And yeah, so I don't, just knowing you as I do, I certainly don't see that there's any reason to feel guilt, but that's what we do. And then we drink to push it away. And so what did that, how did that look like for you? What was happening? How did you move to the next phase?
Yeah, so I went through, so that happened in my early 30s, and went through, and I didn't talk about it. I went through maybe a couple of counseling sessions, but I didn't talk about it. And had I to do it over again, I would definitely have done some more work around that, because it's something that I've carried with me. But so I went through those early 30s of, oh, I'm okay, I'm fine, after, and the thing about grief is, and a friend told me this the other day, is you feel when you have something like that happen to you, people are so supportive, in the beginning. I had friends that were really supportive, and, my family supported because they knew she was a friend of mine. But after a few years, they stop asking, how are you doing? And something like that, in terms of grief, if you don't deal with it, it's going to be there. And your friends stop asking, and you push it aside. And it's not until that you go through other things in your life. So that happened. And then when other things in my life started popping up, and I started to do the work of, okay, what is really going on? Why am I feeling this way? Why I feel guilt? Why do I feel shame? It's those areas in your past that maybe you have not dealt with that you need to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So, I went through my 30s of, I'm okay, a couple of years passed, and, it's fine. And, I started to, I worked for a corporation that the culture was drinking. And so the culture was, You would go out there. There was a pub in the building. You would go out. You were, I was a salesperson and marketing person and a project management person all in one. And so you would go out and you would drink with people. That was what was acceptable. And so before that, I thought, well, gosh, I just have a problem with hard liquor, because that's what I was drinking at the time in my early 30s, Seagram 7 or, hard liquor, whatever it was. And I thought, well, I'll just get rid of that and that will solve the problem. And, I would, my family knew I had a problem, during my early 30s, because they would see it. They, said, Amy, you've got to do something about this. And so they would step in. So I said, well, I'll just get rid of the hard liquor and that will be good. And so I thought, well, I'll just drink wine. So you negotiate with yourself of what you can and cannot do. And, working for this corporation, it was like, oh, I'll just drink wine, when I go out. And thinking that was going to be okay because it's socially acceptable. It's what was expected. And so the wine started to turn into, well, I'll drink more and more wine because I already had that behavior of, either numbing myself to forget about the guilt or shame that I've had before, or to feel like I had to drink to socialize, or, all of these things, that came up. And so the wine started to become a problem. And, when you think that, when you negotiate with yourself of, well, I'll only drink a certain drink, or I only drink on the weekends, or I only drink on these certain occasions, that's negotiations.
Yeah.
And it didn't work for me. So, I would, do it for a while, but then it turned into something else. And, I just got, I knew by my later 30s, it's like, this is not working for me. This is a problem. And, I'm using alcohol for reasons that, I thought was not normal. I don't know what normal drinking is, but, that wasn't acceptable. And so I think that, I started to realize in my later 30s that was starting to become a problem. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's so true. Everything that you're saying. I mean, I remember that in my own journey so well, the negotiation and the back and forth and just being like, trying to even ascertain, like, is this even an issue? Especially because I only recently really realized how much I was downplaying to myself my own behavior. Like, it was once I admitted it, I was like, oh, I was fully aware. But then I remembered somebody said something to me recently. They basically said, like, oh, I don't drink all that much. And just her exact sequence of words, I was like, oh my gosh, I could hear myself saying that. In times when I was drinking tons, but we really make it, we make it less, and through all the negotiations. So, all right. So then what's next?
Yeah. So there's more after that. So then I started, I lived by myself at the time, and I wasn't involved with anyone. And, I would have fun, I would go out with friends and just drink. And, I thought, yeah, this is the normal thing to do, and felt accepted, that part of acceptance, social acceptance of wanting to be accepted. And, this is the normal thing to do. And then I started to go home. I lived close by at home, where I worked. I lived really close by. And I would go home at work and, have a few sips of wine, or, and during lunch, my lunch break. And I thought, this is not right. In my mind, I thought this isn't right, but it was okay. I'm still working, working very well and doing all these great things. And, it's not a problem. but in my mind, I knew it was like in my like cognitive dissonance that was a problem. And so I, later on was just drinking more and more. And I remember, I don't know if you would think this would be a rock bottom for me, but it really wasn't. But I went out one night, and and I go through periodic times of not drinking, like, oh, I'm going to do a week or, a couple weeks, and then I'm going to go out on the weekend and go to a social event and drink. And so it was one of those times, and it was a Friday night. I went out with a bunch of my work colleagues, my friends, and we started right after work drinking wine, and went to a bar after that and danced. And I ended up, and I haven't told a lot of people this, I ended up in the bathroom floor at that restaurant, could not move, was throwing up. Ambulance had to come and pick me up and took me to the hospital. Wow. And I stayed overnight at that hospital. And this was like in the middle of, I was moving up the ladder at this corporate place. And it was a Friday night. And I think, holy crap, here I am, I wake up Saturday morning. I was like, what the heck am I doing in this place? Like, why am I here? And again, you would think that would have been a rock bottom. And I thought, well, in my mind, I thought, I'm never going to drink again. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that again. And so I quit for, another month or two. And then I started to, of course, start going out and drinking. And I think, throughout my life, especially the later years of being, I felt disconnected from God and my faith and my spirituality, especially in those years of my 30s and early 40s. And God was giving me little signposts along the way and he talked to me and he said, Amy, you're going down the wrong path. Mm. And so these little signposts kept coming up. And when I think it was May or June of 2018, before that I said, I've got to do something about my drinking. I want to stop, or I want to moderate. I need to do something that's going to bring me back to who I am. And because I was getting lost, I was losing myself in my drinking. And when I found your book, The Snake in Mind, I downloaded the audio, and I was like, well, I don't know what this is. I mean, it was like I think it was one of those things where, things pop up and, hey, read this and, download it. So I downloaded it, and I thought, oh, this is really interesting. And what really sat with me was the whole consciousness and unconsciousness, your thoughts of your beliefs around what alcohol does, what it is, what it does to you, and the no judgment, because throughout my life I felt I don't want to talk to anyone about this. I don't want to share my story. And it's an interesting thing that a friend said to me today. Sharing your own life story is sharing the beauty of God's creation. Mm. And that really stuck with me, is because we are all human. We all have our own stories, and it's not our faults. And I think that's what really stuck with me when you said, it's not your fault. And it is your responsibility to learn what you can learn and to grow from it. And so that's when I started my journey of learning from, what does alcohol do? What is my relationship with alcohol? And I'd never done that work before. I'd never thought about how I used alcohol to numb myself, or to, because I didn't want to face things in my life, things that have happened. And so I completely numbed that and just wanted to forget everything about it. And in that process, not only did I lose myself, but I lost my relationship with God. And so when I started to listen to what alcohol does, and really connecting that, my thoughts and beliefs around alcohol, is when I really started to find myself again.
Yeah, it's so awesome how that works. Just really being able to see that, like I say it a lot, but that you're doing the best you can with the tools you have, and just putting down those weapons of blame and shame. And it's interesting because, so there's such a misnomer that it's evil that keeps us from like ourselves, from our creator, from God, from whatever. But it's not evil. It's not doing bad things. It's not making mistakes. It's being embarrassed and shameful of those mistakes, and not allowing them to come into the light, not allowing ourselves to, and not forgiving ourselves, not telling our story. And I love how Brene Brown talks about, shame can't survive vulnerability. It just can't. Like, you can't tell your story and retain self-hatred and shame at the same time, because all of a sudden you have to see yourself with an objective enough distance to say, oh, okay, well, geez, like, let's look at Amy's story. Holy cow, that's insane. She's growing up in this church where she has so much faith and so much passion. And so it's not even that it's an option to just up and leave and hate the church. And because her heart has been totally captured, but because of, the humans within the church, and who knows, all sorts
But here's the thing. So, yeah, growing up in the church, I grew up, there are a lot of different churches, right? And things have changed. So I'm like 48 years old. Things have changed from when I was younger. And, the church that I grew up in, I am so glad that I grew up in a church. Let me put that out first and foremost. I am so glad that I have that foundation, and the foundation of faith in God. It's a relationship that I have. It's not religion, it's a relationship. And I am so glad that I have that. The thing is, there are churches out there now that are welcoming to people like me. And that was harder to find when I was younger. And, I read a statistic earlier today. I can't remember, what it was, but especially for the youth, that the youth who are LGBTQ struggle so much with alcohol, and they struggle with suicide because they don't feel like there's a place where they can be accepted. And that was even more so, I think, when I was growing up, that you hid who you were. You felt ashamed. You didn't have the, you felt like if you were going to say something, you were going to be ostracized from your friends, from your faith, from whatever. And so my relationship with God was so important. Just like you said, it was so important that I didn't want to ostracize myself from that. Mm. And the really, really cool thing about that now is, and that's the message, that I like to send, is that now there are places of acceptance, that you can be who you are and be accepted, so that is so encouraging and so empowering, that people can still be who they are and love themselves, and God loves you, so through all of that, that And that's the message of hope that I like to bring.
That's beautiful. It's really cool. And it's so amazing how much things are changing in like 48 short life, you know, for things to have changed that much. That's really beautiful. And it's also interesting because I had the opportunity, Pete Holmes is a comedian, and he wrote a book called Sex God, I think is the name of it. No, is that right? I'm gonna have to look it up as we're talking because I don't want to get it wrong. But anyway, I had the opportunity to see him because he also stopped drinking with this naked mind. And so he was in Denver, and I knew this because I had heard about it on a podcast. It was on Dax Shepard's podcast. And so I'd heard about it. And so I was like, okay, Comedy Sex God is the name of the book, Comedy Sex God. So anyway, so he came, and in this book, he tells this story of growing up in the church and being straight, but being very like a normal, very horny 13, 14,
Yeah.
15, 16-year-old boy, and also feeling totally ostracized, right? And I do think it is so situational, right? We can never put a blanket on anything. We can't put a blanket on church, on religion, on any of those things. But it's just so interesting that in his story, there was so much shame that was even caused just because of masturbation, right? So it was like a different take on the same thing. But
Yeah.
also, and he didn't feel like he could talk to anybody about it. And he felt like he was the only one in the entire church doing it. And he didn't feel like he could talk to his parents. And he felt like he was going like to hell on a regular basis. And so he writes all about this. And he has also come sort of full circle to really find the relationship and the beauty in the faith. But as a result of that, being able to just sort of tell his story. And what I think is so cool about that and what you're doing with your story is it is again, it's not in the bad things that we do, or even if you can call them bad, because they're all just part of the journey. They're all just, you know, what it is. It's in our own inability to let go of our own blame, our own shame, our own guilt around it. And like, the more that you talk and tell your story, the more that, you know, Pete tells his story, like now there's a whole generation of 15-year-old boys will be like, okay, I'm not totally destined for, you know, torment because of something that's so biological and natural. Right. And same with
But
you.
I think
Like,
that's the thing. Yeah. You have to be courageous to tell your story.
yep.
And there's this thing of, gosh, you know, it's so easy to stay hidden, right? It is so easy to say, you know what? Yeah, I've got this story, but I'm safe. I'm not going to share it with anyone. I'm safe in my own little, you know, cocoon, whatever it is. But then there is this thing of, but what if I did share my story? How would that help other Amy's, you know, out there? How would it help, you know, other people who are struggling with the same thing? And I think that takes courage, you know, to do that, to be able to say, you know what, yeah, this happened, and this is how I came through on the other side, and it can happen for you too. So that's the hope.
I love it so much. It's so beautiful, Amy. I mean, it's so good and authentic and so important. And it's so well, like, it's just, even outside of the alcohol conversation, which is bravery all by itself and courage all by itself, just the conversation that your faith and your sexuality they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, there's so much power in that. And yeah, just really so thrilled that you are sharing that and sharing what's true for you, sharing your truth around this, and sharing, because it's just so impactful, so impactful.
Yeah, thank you.
So is there any other details, any more to go through the journey?
Through the journey, I think what's important, you know, for my journey is that, okay, so I found This Naked Mind in 2018 and went through the live alcohol experiment in 2019 and in January. and was successful for 32 days. So I say 32 days because guess what happens on day 33? Yeah, I got a little cocky. I thought, well, I've got this. And it was never my intention for myself to quit drinking altogether. That was not my intention in 2019. So I thought, I'm going to moderate. And I think and this is something that I've talked about with other people, is in moderation, as you talked about, that takes a lot of energy and willpower, that you're using up that willpower. And I thought, I can moderate. And what happened was on day 33, I had a glass of wine and I had another glass of wine. And then the next days, I started to drink more and more. And I think, the caution is, actually I started drinking more than I did before I started the live alcohol experiment. And I think that is something that people want to be aware of, is that I think you wrote about that in your book, of your brain is conditioned to go back to the way it was when you were drinking. If you stop drinking, you go back to drinking. That's why, like, if you've gone 10 days, 10 years, and you start drinking again, your brain can be conditioned to go back to the way it was before. And so that was my caution of, what, I can't do this, for myself. And each person has their own journey. And I also say that, each person has their own journey. So you have to decide what journey that you want to be on. But for myself, I knew that moderation was not going to work for me. So, going through that experience of, now I know that. So each experience that you have is a learning experience. It's an opportunity for growth. Mm-hmm. And, we talk about this. It's not slip-ups are not failures. It's an opportunity for growth. And so I really want to encourage people who are listening to this and watching this, that if you do have that slip up, that's okay. And it's an opportunity for growth. And how do you want to work through that? What can you learn from that? And so, I took that and I learned from it and decided what my path, what I wanted to do for my path. And I think that's something, because we think about, we compare ourselves to other people. Of, my friends that I've gone through this experiment with are 1+ years being alcohol free. I'm not there. But I rejoice in their successes. And I'm like, yay, great. I am getting there. And that's okay. So, each person is on their own path. And I think that's an important lesson. That was an important lesson for me, is that you want to embrace what path that you're on and celebrate that. So
I love that so much. That's so awesome. So if you were going to go back in time, Amy, and talk to yourself, who was, feeling so much cognitive dissonance around the conflicting sort of stories in her life that she hadn't resolved, and, really turning to alcohol to handle it, and tell her about like where you are today and what you have resolved and where you've come, and what would you tell her? What would you let her know?
Oh man, that's, so I keep a journal, and on that journal, the front page, I have 2 pictures of my young self as a little girl, cute little girl. I was a cute little girl. Little pigtails, bright eyes, blue eyes. And, I look at this little girl and with so much love now. And, I think the hardest thing for me in my journey of being gay and being a Christian and having struggles with alcohol is I didn't love myself. And if you don't love yourself, that really sucks, to be quite honest. I'm a recovering people pleaser. And, I've lived my life to please others of what I should be, what I should do, how I should act, how I should dress, how my hair should be. It's a nod to my mom. I love you, Mom. All of this stuff. And I would look back at that young little girl and say, love yourself. Be yourself. Be proud of who you are, because you're an amazing little girl, and you're going to grow up and do amazing, wonderful things because you are so full of love, kindness, grace, and compassion. And that's what I would say.
That's awesome.
And that helps me.
Yeah, so good. So good. So good. So if someone's listening to this and they'd love to even work with you, Amy, because maybe their story is similar to your story, or something you've said has just really resonated, you're now a certified coach. And where can people find you?
So they can find me at Hope on Solid Ground. So that's Hope, Hope, on solidground.com. And Hope really is about honoring who you are, observing your thoughts and your beliefs, and really participating in who you are and living your fullest life so that you can empower yourself. So that's what hope means.
I love it. It's so beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being here, for showing up, for telling your story, for having all the courage. And I know that this is going to impact lives. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Annie. I appreciate being here. Appreciate it.
Hi, are you looking to connect with like-minded people? Sometimes maybe you feel like, as someone who knows all this information from the Naked Mind or the alcohol experiment, that you're living in a world of muggles and people just don't speak your language. That is why I created The Exchange. The Exchange is an online community where we meet face-to-face, live video calls multiple times a week with people from all over the globe, just to connect, to have somewhere you're seen and you're heard and you feel less alone, and really that you can give back and get the support you need. So if this sounds great to you, check it out at thisnakedmind.com/exchange. And as always, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, as it truly helps the message reach somebody who might need to hear it today.